It's yes. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Agile Product Operating Model. My name is Tolga Kombak. I'm an agility consultant and trainer at ACM Agile. I'm also the Scrum Master of Onabu team. Onabu is the first AI Agile coach that we have developed and still developing, and also one of the professional Scrum trainers at Scrum.org. And as ACM Agile, we've been partnering with Scrum.org since 2009, and with more than 25 Agile coaches and consultants, we've been delivering numerous trainings, including Scrum.org trainings, and with our team coaching and organizational level consultancy coaching, enterprise coaching, we've been helping many organizations in their agility journeys. So today, we have a very valued guest, Dave West, CEO and product owner of Scrum.org. And I'm really happy that we had this opportunity to listen to APOM, Agile Product Operating Model from firsthand from Scrum.org, from Dave. And so, Dave, thank you for your time and warm welcome from mostly, I think, 25, 26, we were from the Turkish Agilists, I guess. So I don't want to spend too much time of yours. So we can directly step into APOM, maybe. And for the sake of the flow, I'm going to turn off the microphones just in case there are some background noise, etc. And at the end, I think we'll have 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your speed, Dave, which should
Yes.
not be so fast, but it's okay to go with fluent. I mean, with I love the Brit accent, and we're gonna have like 10, 15 minutes for your questions and answers from Dave. So
Okay.
please go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Tolga. I've shared my screen. Hopefully you can all see it. Um,
Yeah,
Let me know if you
see that.
can't. So thank you for inviting me. This is first day back here after 2 weeks of we call it the holidays here in America. Where with Christmas, New Year, I really appreciate giving this opportunity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Agile Product Operating Model and the reason why I think this set of ideas is such an important next step in the evolution of agile thinking as we try to help people deliver valuable capabilities to organizations and to the world. You know who I am. If as I said earlier, if you're interested in carrying on the conversation about any of the topics that come up today, including the Agile Alliance acquisition by the PMI, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a conversation. As Tolga and Emmett and a few of the other people that are on this call know, talking isn't something I don't like doing, which is probably a problem, but that's another thing. So you know who Scrum.org is, a little bit over 1 million certified professionals all over the world. We get about over 1 million people to the website every month, and we've got about over 350 trainers in 48 countries, actually teaching in about 60 something countries. Which is interesting, and an interesting other little piece of data that in terms of the certified holders, every single country, in fact more countries than the UN believes exists. We're over 200 countries that have certified holder professionals in them, which is kind of cool. And it's interesting that Google and the UN seem to have a difference of opinion on how many countries there are in the world. But anyway, and you know what our mission is: to help people and teams solve complex problems. And my boss is Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum and the Agile Manifesto signatory, and bizarrely one of the people that created the Agile Alliance, because people kept bothering him after Snowbird, and he said, "Oh, we need to sort this out and create an organization that brings these people together," and that was the motivation for the Agile Alliance a number of years ago. But before we talk about the Agile Product Operating Model and why it needs to be evidence-based, I just really want to tell you a story. And it's a story that really illustrates the disconnect, the difference between organizations that get it and organizations that don't. And it's going to be based on a story about this thing called the space program here in the United States. As many of you know, when the Challenger disaster happened, it ended the space shuttle program here, which basically stopped the United States from being able to put people into space. That was a little embarrassing because we had a timeshare on this thing called the International Space Station, which, we shared it with Russia and the European Union and some others, India, I think, as well. And we couldn't actually get people onto it, astronauts onto this space station. We had to rely on Russia and others to help us. So, what was interesting about that was that actually, under Obama, they decided to initiate a program to provide space, manned space flight back. And when Congress gave the money, a little bit over $5 billion, they decided to give the money to two organizations. Boeing, who had a very proven track record of delivering space flight, going all the way back to Mercury, which was pre-Apollo. The earliest space flight in America was enabled by the Boeing organization, working with other partners, obviously, and NASA being the administrator. And then there was this upstart run by this kind of interesting character called Elon Musk, who was doing a really good job putting low orbit satellites in space, but had never done manned spaceflight, which is a lot more complicated, right? So they decided to award the majority of the money to a proven vendor called Boeing. And they created this program called the Starliner. And the first product was CST 100, which was this product that would allow human beings to go into space, predominantly initially to support the International Space Station, but all that data would then feed into the Artemis program, which was taking people back to the moon, and then into the bigger program, which was taking people to Mars. And so they decided to give $3 billion to over $3 billion to Boeing, and SpaceX, they gave just over 1 billion with the idea that they'd do some work, but the majority of the heavy lifting would be done by Boeing, and SpaceX would provide some support. The reason why I'm waffling on and telling this program is, one, isn't it fascinating the how much it costs to build a spaceship, I guess, but also the reason that it was fascinating is they decided to do two vendors, which is pretty unusual in this. And that was driven by the experience the US administration had with Obamacare and other programs that were complete disasters. And so they thought, maybe we need to do this a little bit different. They also said, this is a fixed price contract. These are our outcomes that we expect. This is how much money you've got. You go and do whatever you need to do. And that caused all sorts of problems. So ultimately, it led to a bit of a disaster. The Boeing program, Starliner, was continuously a program of disasters. And in fact, Laurie Garver describes it as the difference between SpaceX and Boeing is really the difference between two companies' cultures, design philosophies, and decision-making structures. And that allowed SpaceX to excel in this fixed price, outcome-oriented contract, whereas Boeing stumbled after receiving a lot more money. And these are some of when you read all the articles about it, handoffs, no end-to-end testing, software integration, loads and loads of subcontractors, milestones, layers of middle management, milestone-driven payments, which was really bizarre considering it was a fixed price contract. They still built themselves because they were very familiar with the process that they'd used historically, which really was a time and materials contract with NASA, where they just worked as much as they needed to. Any overruns were fine. They just then created a change order. The change order was usually accepted, blah, blah, blah. And it worked like that. They had this entire process built around that, and they just executed that process, and it was a disaster. Now, you all know what happened. We have two astronauts stuck in space that went up on the Boeing Starliner, but there were so many issues, they didn't go back with them. And one of them, Sunita Williams, lives actually on the next town to me here in Massachusetts. and she was meant to be home at Christmas. She's kind of a famous person here. She does events and talks to kids, particularly school kids in the region. My kids have fortunately met her, and that did not happen this Christmas or this holiday period. And ultimately, it got me thinking as I read these articles, because this isn't just about Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing's an amazing company, and it's got fantastic engineers and a really good track record and a lot of history. You know, and SpaceX is an upstart, a new company, a digital first or digital native company with a very different philosophy to life. And what it really illustrated to me was that many organizations are going through the same challenge. That ultimately that they're amazing companies that can't work in a different way as the environment around them changes. Now, fixed prices was the catalyst to the change, but it was something more than that. It was the fact that the way in which Boeing managed risk and managed the unknown was very different to the way in which SpaceX managed risk and the unknown. So, and I think it's around change or around uncertainty. The fact that Boeing could not operate in this uncertain market environment. Now, putting people into space is an incredibly complex thing. There's lots of things that you don't know, particularly when you're trying to do things differently with reusable rockets, reducing the cost per launch or per mission. All of these constraints and all these things were continuously changing. The technology was changing. And Boeing just couldn't handle that, hadn't got a system or a process or an approach or a mindset that could handle it. So we know how to work in this world. This isn't rocket science, no pun intended. We know through things like Scrum, and things like Lean Startup, which embodies that, and design thinking, how to work in uncertainty, how to work in an environment where things continuously changing. We know how to set clear goals. We know how to incrementally make progress towards those goals. We know how to empower people to make decisions that are closer to the problem, to increase the feedback cycles, to increase and empower the decision-making processes to make things work more effectively. A great example with the Boeing SpaceX is how they tested their rocket motors. Now, apparently, who knew this? There's only one place in America you can test a rocket. It's in New Mexico or Arizona or somewhere in Nevada, somewhere in big desert, right? You traditionally ship your rocket motor there, the Raptor motor in this case from SpaceX, and they test it, do loads of tests. They get loads of data. They then ship it back. You make changes based on the data. You ship it there, and you do this a few times. SpaceX didn't work like that. They had an empowered team around this subsystem or this product. And what they did was they literally went with the rocket. You can imagine a sort of like a series of caravans and this huge rocket engine. And they took it and then they hung out and then they got the data straight away. They made changes. So they worked significantly faster than how Boeing did it, because Boeing did it the traditional way. But SpaceX had the mantra of effectively being more flexible and focused on the outcome. What's the fastest, cheapest way we can get to that outcome was their mantra. That's how they worked. So these ideas we know. However, we continuously see the Boeing model. I'm calling it water scrum full, but this idea that you've got this huge planning process, work gets broken down, given to subsystem or system teams that then work on it, which then get done. You work with multiple subcontractors, all of them are specializing around the work. And you don't work on goals. You do work backlogs rather than outcome backlogs. You don't have a definition of actually what value is. You have a definition of ready to start work. There's no sprint goal. You do status meetings, to get the milestone payments, I assume, in the case of Boeing. You have this release process that happens separately, and all you care about is the efficiency of your small bit. whereas that bit may actually undermine the broader bit. You optimize, you sub-optimize because of the local optimization. So we still see that over and over again for lots of reasons. I think Boeing is a great example of where the business, the people that really signed up for the contract. By the way, they have said officially they will do no fixed price contracts in the future. Now that's ironic because the US government is like, well, that's all we're going to be giving you. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So the business and the technology, the people delivering the product, are totally disconnected. So you've got these two very separate processes running. And then you've got bureaucracy and hierarchy, the lines and lines of middle management presenting information back to the business, creating these status reports, etc. And ultimately, and this is the ironic thing, Boeing is definitely significantly risk averse. Now, the reality meant that risk dropped into the system because they weren't willing to trust the teams. They weren't willing to break the processes. They weren't willing to try things differently because that's not how we do it. And that ultimately ended up creating a lot more risk. How many times have you been on projects or working on products where you have to do all this compliance stuff that actually doesn't really reduce the risk? It's just an additional set of steps. And because you're doing that, you aren't spending the time testing, or you're not spending the time trying different things, doing experimentation and the like. So I believe, and I think this has been at the heart of Scrum for the last 30 years, that product provides a different paradigm. That product provides a paradigm that can help us really approach this in a more effective way. And I think SpaceX is a great example of an organization that have really, really embarked on that. And if you're going to describe the difference in culture, maybe these are some of the words I would use to describe the difference. So product versus project. You can think of Boeing as a very project-oriented organization. You think of SpaceX as more of a product-centric. Now, that mindset is fundamental to SpaceX. For instance, though they took money from NASA and the United States government to put together a program to support their needs, they have a much longer journey in mind. They have a very clear product vision, and actually it's beyond the products. It's a company mission around occupying Mars, allowing humanity to be a multi-planet species, which is kind of crazy. Why we don't just not if we could not mess up the planet Earth we've got, I think it'd be a lot less trouble than
There
going
are
to
seven
Mars.
more. We can go to another planet. Why not?
Yeah, exactly, Tolga. Let's mess this one up and move on. That's definitely American philosophy and everything. But anyway, so sorry, got a bit political there. But the point is that they have this broader mission, which allows them a lot of flexibility, whereas Boeing were focused on this one mission. They had a fixed, project plan that they built, probably with amazing engineers at the start. And as soon as that went awry, it all went horribly wrong because they were managing to time scope the iron triangle, time, scope, and cost. They weren't managing to value. They weren't managing to outcomes. Temporary resources, great example. As they optimize, using critical path analysis, they optimize the development process. That created this, resources that came in and went out. Because of that, they ended up losing a lot of the thoughts and the like. Now, Boeing also had another crisis with their aviation business, which meant some engineers moved into a different part of the organization, which reduced the effectiveness of their product teams with respect to space. So, focus teams, outcomes and value. And really, if you're going to look at the product versus project approach, there's three things that SpaceX did really well, and in general, organizations that are structured in this way. There's a company here called Dino Therapeutics that have really approached their entire business in this way. And these three things tend to be the things that are illustrative. One is mindset. look at the interviews of SpaceX and the like. What you hear is an organization that's very much focused on the outcome. Now, the stakeholders in the case of SpaceX, you could argue, Elon Musk, etc., whether they've necessarily got the best interests of the world around them but immaterial. They're very much focused on the outcome. They care deeply about dependencies, removing them and mitigating them. They know what core versus context is, which is definitely a trait that Tesla also has. They know what the core part of their product is, and everything else is, we're not going to spend 3 months building the best seats. We'll just buy them because that's not core to our business. They also empower ownership quite low down in the organization, primarily because they don't have middle management. So they have this sort of mindset, this philosophy, this focus, and they care about the product that they're delivering. Also, they align around that. So they don't have this product in mind, and then that then gets distributed into these specialized teams and aligned around, geographical boundaries or whatever. They literally align around the product, which is really, really important, I think, because when you have that disconnect, we all see it, the Conway's law is an embodiment of this. When you have that disconnect between how you're basically approaching the problem and how you're aligned, then there's obviously tension. And then investment. They invest in this way as well, which I think is super, super important. So everything aligns, mindset, alignment, and investment around the idea of product. They've built an organization that is very product centric. Now, if you're going to be product centric, you need to think about the way in which you operate, the operating model that supports it. Now, an operating model comprises of these kind of elements. How do you organize the people? How do you measure and incentivize them? What does promotion mean? What processes do you use? How do you govern? Obviously you're spending other people's money. So 9 times out of 10, you've got to actually have some sort of compliance or governance process. Maybe you're doing something in an industry like pharmaceutical or air travel or, where there's laws that you have to combine. And then what is that ultimate culture that you need to have in place to support this? So you need to have an operating model that is aligned to product to make that work. And I would argue, based on the experience that we see from organizations like SpaceX, Dino Therapeutics, and others, that it needs to be agile because the environment that you're operating in is continuously changing. We are about to change president in the United States. And I think we're going to go into a time where change and surprises and, a level of unknown is going to become more the norm. And I think that's true not only of the administration and the impact on the US, but throughout the world. Obviously, changes in Europe are happening with Ukraine and the Middle East, which you're very, very familiar with, but heavily involved in both. And that we've got China. Everything's going to be always. So you need to build an operating model that isn't planning every 3 years and then operating on that plan, which is what Boeing did, but something that's a lot more oriented around agility and the like. So, but it is more than just an operating model. You also need to think about, in the context of the strategy of the organization, what products you have, how do you manage your portfolio in a broader way? How do you operate it? And then how do you introduce change into the organization systemically? And what I mean there is, it is likely that first product may not be right, meaning the boundary, meaning the customer, meaning the organization that supports it, the stakeholders. So how do you manage change continuously around your product operating model and your product portfolio so that you can effectively continuously change? Now, this is something that agility hasn't done a particularly good job of dealing with. But ultimately, agility should be about building a system in an organization that continuously manages change. what we tend to see is we implement the Spotify model, safe, Scrum, and then we're done, and then we move on, which is ludicrous. The idea is that we're continuously inspecting and adapting, changing our organization. And it's hard to do this, by the way, based on the experiences and the information that we're getting from the products that are delivering value to the market. So it's more than just an operating model. So what's a product? Let's start there. The 2020 version of 5 years ago, golly gosh, that seems, where have those 5 years gone? Obviously, two of them we were trapped inside, but the Scrum Guide updated and actually described product as a vehicle to deliver value, has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. That's kind of a broad concept, but the important points are around value, boundary, has some longevity, as it were, well-defined customers, users, stakeholders. And it can be something really, really very particular, like a razor. Gillette released their new razor using Scrum, the exfoliating razor, the new one that they have produced. They used Scrum on that. They had a very clear product. Actually, it was this, interestingly, it isn't just the razor. That was one product. It was also the blade thing. That was a separate product. The delivery, there was multiple products, packaging products that were different. They also considered the way in which they delivered the razor, the systems around that, as a separate product, a manufacturing process. That was a different product. They had dependencies, but they built teams around that product architecture. And in fact, that brings me to product definition. Anything can be a product in your organization, but obviously the simplest ones are the external products. And we did a whole webinar on this if you're interested. The things that somebody uses, a mortgage product, for instance, for buying a house, an insurance product for underwriting the risk in your own lives. But they can also be internal products. They could be a service that you provide internally to your claims desk or your help desks or whatever, and shared services that are then used by multiple products. For instance, in financial services, there's probably some shared services around customer that's really important. So I can't tell you what your products are, and it is an incredibly complex process to identify them if you're moving from a project culture to a product culture. However, they need to have users, they need to have stakeholders, they need to have value, they need to have a boundary, and they need to exist longer than just that small amount of time. So that's the difference between them and a project. And it is incredibly complex and very political. I interviewed for the webinar, I interviewed a few organizations that were on this journey, and I was surprised by the political complexity that defining products really had.
That might
So,
be the biggest, sorry to interrupt, but that might be the biggest maybe problem in the organizations to define what their products are. Maybe, but let's park it for now. I'm not going to interrupt too much, but that's, I think, the biggest problem in the complex organizations to define their value streams, maybe, if you may, but
yeah.
it's the
So
biggest
it's
problem, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. So value streams are one mechanism for identifying where your products are and where the boundaries are. They aren't the only mechanism. So you end up having to do this quite iterative process from my discussions with organizations that have done it, because you can't forget the existing applications, the existing skills that you've got, the power and politics that somebody's running an organization that has 50 people in it that manages this set of applications and teams, and suddenly you're saying, well, actually those people need to be distributed into a series of products and that application is shared by those products. And sometimes that can be very, very challenging to deal with. It requires a level of empathy. I think it requires a level of transparency, and you have to understand why you are defining products. You're trying to reduce dependencies, encourage empowerment for the teams, have clear goals so that you can, because of the sheer complexity of the environment that you're working in, if you have a large amount of dependencies where you have this app being used and this one team managing it by thousands of other teams, then it becomes almost untenable to keep, to keep managing that change when your environment is changing. And I think that those things become important. But you're exactly right, Tolga. It is a lot more complicated. So what I suggest in organizations, and this is later in the slide deck, but is start with one, the most obvious one, and then just start learning from that and put a wall around that to protect it from the mess that is perhaps most the bureaucracy of an organization, and
Yeah, I
then
mean, so
see.
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but there's a very great webinar on this by Patricia Kong and Dave West discussing what a product is actually. So you may find in scrum.org resources about what this is the biggest problem. So what a product is in the organizations. But let
Yeah,
me
let's move on and
shut up
talk a
now
little
for
bit about some of the other perspectives of a product. But yes, I don't know how good it is, that podcast, but it certainly probably asks you a lot of questions, which is always
now.
worrying. Anyway, so when you're thinking about a product, though, you need to think about it not just in terms of the thing that's being delivered, the capability that's being delivered. You need to think of it in terms of the business strategy around it. You need to think about the technology strategy, the combination of business and technology strategy, often called product strategy, operational stability, governance and flow. Who owns it? Who can change it? Who's responsible for those? Who needs to know when you've changed it? And then obviously the P&L, the total cost of value, sort of how is it valuable enough? Should we be building this ourselves? Should we be maintaining it? Should we just outsource it? Is it core or is it context? Those those elements comprise to what a product is. It's more than just the name and this very clear, oh well, that's the product. If you can build all these five elements, then I think you have a pretty good idea of what your product is. And obviously, sometimes that's pages and pages and PowerPoint decks and a lot of confusion that needs to be aligned, to get some level of alignment. And sometimes it's relatively simple. And I'd always start with the simple ones. Then you have an operating model that supports it. So you've got this product. The operating model really is how do you organize the people and organizations? Now, each of these elements is a presentation unto itself. However, thinking about people and organization, you need to ensure that you're creating an environment where teams can be self-managed and empowered to make decisions. Thinking about measures and incentives, you need to ensure that those measures and incentives encourage agility, meaning they allow empowerment, they allow flexibility, they encourage helping others instead of creating these specialists that hide their information and hoard their knowledge. Obviously, agile processes are at the heart of this, but what we really mean, we don't necessarily mean you don't have to do Scrum, though I would obviously encourage it. It needs to be empirical. It needs to be allow self-management of people, and it needs to have some sort of level of continuous improvement. In terms of culture and behavior, now I don't know much about culture. It seems to be a dark art for me, but the environments that SpaceX is a great example where trust, where teams feel safe in being able to make decisions, where everybody is maniacally focused and have a level of curiosity. If you can create that culture, then I think you'll be very, very successful. And governance, and this often trips us up, we put all this governance in place when we don't really know why we're doing it. So clear ownership and transparency. And that tends to mean simplicity around your governance processes. Now, each of those are potentially other presentations that we could spend hours talking about. However, today we're just giving an overview of a broader topic. The other thing that the phrase we use is evidence-based. So what's really, really obvious when you talk to organizations that are on this journey and talk to organizations that aren't, is that evidence, outcomes, measures that are outcome-centric drives behavior. Now, obviously, we believe in EBM, a great mechanism for managing product outcomes is evidence-based management from our experience. But you can use your own OKR model if you like. But we believe that the two fundamental market drivers are the value we have today, sustaining it, maintaining it, and then the unrealized value, the opportunity. So if you're looking at SpaceX, obviously, continuously being able to deliver that cycle of space flight whilst getting to Mars, right? Or Moon and then Mars. That's a pretty big unrealized value. Now, what's interesting is, though that wasn't in the mission parameters of the program funded by NASA, that definitely becomes apparent in how they're thinking about reuse of components, how they're building the technical infrastructure to support the future. It's definitely influencing their behavior, and ultimately ended up with them doing better than a company that was very much focused just on this mission. Organizational capability, which is ability to innovate and time to market. So that cycle time, that idea to implementation, that feedback cycle, coupled with how much of the stuff that you're releasing to market is about innovation versus the status quo. So that's what we care deeply about in terms of evidence-based. However, use whatever framework you feel is better. Now, a quick word about roles, and I'm conscious of time. I have waffled on a bit. It's first time I presented this year, so I've been thinking a lot over the break, so my brain's full of ideas, which is never a good thing, right? So there's two particular roles for a product that are super important. One is obviously the product owner stroke manager, who's setting the direction, who's building that strategy, that product strategy, that's engaging with the stakeholders on where that product's going, and really focused on UV, CV in terms of their focus. And then you've got delivery manager, scrum master, who's really caring about how fast that learning cycle is and how much of the stuff that we're releasing is innovation versus status quo. And then they all care about quality, governance, ethics, culture, and the like. So product owner and scrum master have key roles in this operating model. Now, okay, you're probably all cynically sitting there, or maybe having dinner or having a cup of tea, which I love when I come to Istanbul and Turkey, and you're like, yeah, whatever, Dave. You're just trying to reinvent the wheel right here. You're just jumping on the product bandwagon. And there is some truth to that. I've read all of Marty Kagan's work, and it's really interesting and valuable. I don't particularly like the way he talks about teams that delivery teams. He seems to think that understanding problems, really trying to refine ideas, is the province of other people. And I don't agree. I think it's ultimately the relationship with delivery, I think, needs to be much tighter. However, his ideas are pretty damn awesome in many ways. So obviously he's writing a lot about it. You've got McKinsey and BCG writing a lot about this and the importance of product thinking to the future. So it is a popular topic. And we did a survey, 4,500 people, where we asked, do you consider yourself working in a product organization? And 73% of the people that we talked to, and these are obviously people that are familiar with scrum.org, said they were. And 56% of them said that their products were real valuable end-to-end value streams, which was great. However, I'm a little bit cynical. What I took that data and then started to do some interviews and actually worked with our trainers, which you've got Tolga here's a great example, and said, tell me about your customers. Where are your customers on this very simple 2x2? So when I think of product operating model and product thinking, I'm really thinking about two axes. One is, what is it a real product? Does it have value? Does it have a roadmap? Does it have some operational capabilities that are very clear? Does it have stakeholders? What's its productness? Does it have longevity? And then what is the agile or empowered ownership, feedback loops? Can we make decisions? How long does cycle time take? And I would say that if you're in the top right, you're product oriented. And if you're in the bottom left, you're project oriented. If you're interested in more details on this, I've written quite a lot about this 2x2. And this is what I found, or this is what our trainers described, and this is what I have myself see. Most organizations tend to be moving towards the middle, which is great, however, that's still in that water scrum full kind of way of working. So we're not really exploiting the benefit of product, and I'm conscious of time. So is that because, and Craig Larman, the creator of Less, talks a lot about Larman's laws of organizational change or behavior. And he describes this sort of inertia create that, that organizations aren't built to adopt this way of thinking, which is disappointing. So can product break this? Because that's certainly true of agility. These ideas I'm talking about aren't particularly new. Maybe we're packaging them slightly different. Maybe we're adding modern product management practices to them, particularly around elaboration, particularly around, discovering capabilities, and the like. Perhaps we're pushing teams a little bit left in terms of the life cycle, but they're not particularly new. Can product change this? And the short answer is I don't know. Will it be the same? Just relabeling. I was at a bank recently who said, yeah, we're doing product operating model and we're doing it in an agile way. And I interviewed, it was a very, very large bank in the US. I interviewed a couple of people, product owners working there, and they're really not. It's work management, it's their big safe shop, and really they aren't doing, but they think they are, and they've definitely, yes, taken some of those ideas. So is this going to be the same? And the short answer is I don't know. The one thing that we have though with this, and the reason why when Tolga said, how should yeah, it's very hard to define products, and it is. Well, maybe you can start with one product. So we now have a unit of change that is not the whole organization, but is not just one team, that actually allows us to rapidly adopt this mindset and try it. For instance, at a large consumer packaged goods company that has a massive set of factories in Turkey, they're doing it for this. They have an internal product that is a video platform for, like, if you're soap powder or diapers or whatever, they create these how-to videos that they then publish to the world to teach people how to use them. How much powder should you put in your washing machine, and what's the impact, etc. And they have this and they're using product thinking. Historically, this is a shared service that has 4,000 million stakeholders, and they spend their whole time disappointing people. They've now adopted this to simplify that. So they now have real clarity around a product vision. They have a clear ownership model. They have a quarterly business review. They have value measured, and they've adopted it for this in one internal product. Now, that's not the only thing that they do in this organization, and some of it is still very much water scrum full, but that might be a great mechanism. The bottom line is, you need to put in place a process, and this is this change management element, that effectively monitors the boundary of the product, how much value, what's its dependencies, using things like flow metrics and EBM, and then continuously improve. However, if you're not in that position in your own situation, then at least start taking the opportunity of the mindset. Take that product operating model mindset, that product mindset, and adopt it. And that can be delivered at any part of the organization. Look at your backlog today, and if the backlog is a collection of random work, step back. Who's the customer? Why do they want it? Who's paying for it? What's the outcome they see? What's the value you're trying to deliver? And really start to, at least, even if you're not product in the truest sense, at least start managing the work with this product mentality. So my last thing, and I know we're only going to have 9 minutes for questions, and I apologize, is this the next thing of the Agile evolution? Yes. Team, scaling, business. I think Agile product operating model is the next step of the evolution of agility, as we now say, okay, not every enterprise, not every part of the enterprise is going to be agile in the same way, but at least let's start optimizing around our product models. And we can start using this approach in a more effective way. So just to summarize. Okay, so product provides us with a structure to really deal with water scrum fall around mindset, alignment, and investment. It's a natural evolution around agility. However, you really need to have for each product a clear product roadmap, cost of value, operational stability, and governance and flow. And then you build an operating model that is agile, that supports that. To think about people, think about measures, think about processes, think about governance, and think about the culture that you need to distill. And that is the agile product operating model, an evidence-based approach. And hopefully that was interesting. I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see some of your lovely faces, or at least Tolga's lovely,
Yeah, everybody
awesome
can now
face,
turn on their cameras and turn on their
or not,
phones. Please feel free
if
to
you
ask
don't.
questions because I have lots of questions, but I'm trying to pull a Dave whenever we are in a face-to-face or like in a remote setup to ask questions. So please, all the attendees, feel free to ask the questions. Maybe we can use the raise hand button to line up the questions if you have any questions, which is at the bottom of the Zoom with the reactions and raise hands.
And if you haven't got questions, that's also cool. Or if you feel embarrassed and you don't want to, maybe you're eating your dinner or dealing with an unruly child, which is normally my life, and then feel free to ping me later or ask Tolga who or Amit or any of the guys from ACM who are much smarter than me and ask that. But I know Tolga, you've got some questions though. We could spend these next 6, 7 minutes
I have some
talking
questions.
about theirs.
I'm just checking the list if there's a raised hand for any questions, but if not, which is at the moment I don't have a raised hands, I have in mind, Dave, about EBM actually. Uh, because EBM in its all structure is a very great tool, was and is with the changes, is a very handy tool for product development. With are we going in the right direction with the key value areas and
Yeah.
some suggested or example key value measures inside it.
Mm.
And but what I see in EBM and the EBM guide on this all the text and all the examples. At least in my experience, I've seen EBM being used in the team level or at Nexus level with one product and one maybe a part of organization. So is there an intention or is there a future target goal in Scrum.org? Or of course we are going to be maybe collaborating on this, but
Mm.
about EBM additions building on top of
Yeah.
EBM to address or include some more, maybe I don't know, key value measures for more non-IT, non-software organizations and
Yes. I mean, the short
support
answer is
APOM as well.
yes. Yeah, so what's interesting is so the short answer is yes, we're continuously adding more stuff based on experience. For instance, I was talking about Dino Therapeutics. They though they don't call it EBM, they use OKRs and have been trained on EBM. So those OKRs look remarkably like EBM, and they use that to drive the entire organization. Every single investment decision is in the context of those measures, which is really unusual. And they're only 400 or 500 people, and they're doing pharmaceutical stuff. Really interesting. So the short answer is yes, we're going to continuously be improving. But one thing that I've noticed and has had the biggest impact from my experience, and I was talking to one of the stock exchanges recently about introducing is portfolio management. So one thing that we're investing quite a lot of time and effort on this year is providing a more explicit approach to manage a portfolio of products and how projects, investment projects, change, that cross multiple products get managed. And so, from my experience, if you can change the context of the program level initiatives, if you're using SAFe, those enterprise epics or whatever, to really describe value and outcomes and to put that in place in an organization and then frequently measure that, not just have that at the start and then in 2 years later measure it, but have processes in place that allow effective measurement against those things, then that can transform an organization and can create the backdrop. So I think the where EBM, we're going to be spending more time on
Mhm.
EBM is in its relationship with portfolio management.
Yeah.
And because I think that is where we can really look at, okay, so how do you really look at the value of these cross product initiatives, which every organization seems to have a cartload of, and I think that's super interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, any questions from the audience? If not, I still have some questions. And the result of the audience, 32%, which is we were 32 people together. So eight of them, 32% was agile coaches,
Yeah, I
and
saw that.
12% were scrum masters, enterprise agile coaches, some product managers. So, my other question, where's the starting point, do you think, Dave? Because we in lots of
Mm.
organizations, I mean, the organizations that we support as ACM Agile, as organizational or enterprise agile coaches, we see a lot of organizations that are actually have not just legacy codes. I'm an IT guy, so but not just legacy systems, but legacy organizational behaviors which are not actually uh, designed for value delivery
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
outcomes to the customers. But for example, like resource management, are you utilized? Are you
I
blah blah? How is going to be the procurement will be, etc. So, what do you see as a starting point, and who should lead this? Too many questions, maybe, but
Oh
maybe you
gosh. Well,
can.
starting point, I'll start there. The starting point is a lot of organizations are using the opportunity of digital products to drive a different operating model into their business. And I
Exactly.
think things like ChatGPT and LLMs has definitely changed the way in which organizations have to approach delivering value. You know, you sort of t- the traditional very long program models sort of become sort of almost irrelevant when you're trying to build and refine models continuously that may or may not deliver value to a particular part of your business. So I think digital is what I see most organizations, like the consumer packaged goods organization I work with a lot, huge, one of the biggest in the world. And they are looking at this predominantly for their shared internal digital products. And I think that's a great place to begin. You can learn that and then you can grow it. Who leads it? I think that it has to be, unfortunately, in the most organizations, it tends to be driven by the CIO, and that isn't necessarily the right place for it. But I believe that the chief product officer is the CIO. You're basically going to, the CIO role is going to break into two. You're going to have people that basically just support infrastructure, emails, stuff. Actually, that would make a good product though. But they provide infrastructure and services, networks, and all that. And that will be one part of the. And then the other one, the C will be its chief product officer, who will basically be managing all of that, all of the product capabilities in an organization. And I think that that is what we're going to see, that the CIO role is going to fundamentally change, um, or some level below in the case of really large organizations. But it has to be, executives need to take ownership of this. This isn't this is this will only be successful if the people that are accountable for the business outcomes that we're trying to seek own the products that deliver on those business outcomes.
Definitely. Yeah. It's not about just the IT or the supporting functions, but it's a total like mindset change for organizing all the organization around the product, all the which is a very tricky question. And yeah.
But
Uh
it's sort of ironic, Target, that we've been talking for the last 20 years about organizations bringing business and technology together to deliver value to customers. And if you go to a bank, for instance,
Yeah.
they still separate those two things.
Yeah.
And it is true that some of the capabilities that technology provides are just infrastructure like telephone systems, networks, etc. However, the reality is that a bank is of no value without the digital technology. We're no longer moving, on pallets, banknotes.
Yeah.
It's all digital, it's all electronic. And if we can't bring those different parts of the organization together, then ultimately, how are they going to be effective? I mean, because if you're starting a financial services company today, you ain't starting it with two separate organizations. You're starting it with one organization that takes advantage of technology to deliver value.
Exactly.
And I think that's product could be the forcing function, but organizations have to have the desire to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions? We've ran out of our time, actually, maybe 3 minutes
Yeah.
over time. I think there are no hands raised. Dave, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you.
Very inspiring for us. Of course, this is just some kind of a glance, an introduction to what APOM is. And the how parts are still uh,
Oh,
needed by every single different organization by being filled up by different ways. Because there's
eh,
no, as the Scrum Guide is like a framework, APOM is going to be maybe a
yeah, that's exactly right.
so
And
there's
and I think
no
that,
single bullet, silver bullet, or like a magic wand that will solve. But I think having the idea of any organization around the product is going to get us through the next level in the business agility, I guess. So thank you, Dave, very much for this
well,
inspiring talk and very nice use of time, which is very nice. And thanks everyone
thanks
for
everybody.
joining us.
Happy New Year, and hopefully I get to see you again as we add more content around this topic, which particularly around portfolio management. That would be something I'd be very interested in your feedback on. So take care, and thanks for inviting me. Bye, everybody.